is how do we make sure that that is unpacked as well? Because part of the limitation in this whole space is you look at the numbers who are applying and you know that 55% plus are women. So this should be reflected.
Indeed.
Numbers applying, numbers selected, numbers shortlisted, numbers actually in position. And if we're not getting there yet, then what are we doing wrong in that process?
Yeah, politically, what are we doing wrong, Bill Okero, on that? Because even from you 11th Parliament as well, this gender was still a problem. And what does it portend right now that we still have it? We had the civil society moving to court to challenge even the constitutionality of the CSS as well. We seem to be breaking away from the promises that we've made on the ground right now.
The constitution, both in letter and spirit, it talks about progressively achieving the gender balance. Particularly in the elective or in the representation in Parliament and so forth. But it does appreciate that in many of the issues, including appointments to state offices, that recognition is there and it's provided for in letter, actually, in constitution, that we must have representation of women, minorities and marginalized groups and all of. And I think what we are seeing is that progressively this has been addressed, that in all the appointments, it may not be 50-50, but even in this appointment of the cabinet and the principal secretaries, you will find at least the women representation is not less than a third. It's well over a third, actually. But so in my view, I think from 2010, when this constitution came in, there has been a progressive increase in the number of women in both in representation in Parliament, in state offices, and I think this has even been taken care of, even legislation in terms of, for example, providing for contracts and so forth, 1/3 for women and youth and so forth. So I think it's there, but in politics, promising I'll put 1/2 of my cabinet this and 1/2 of my cabinet this, it's not only about women. Promises have been made to so many people, communities, to regions, to institutions. But in politics, when you're out there campaigning, it's a different ballgame. When you come in, it's the reality now. Is different. So I don't think you will actually go by.
We shouldn't be taking this thing seriously.
Pledges made in campaigns should not really be considered when we are looking at how the government works.
But that is pure lying through your teeth. Because if you make these promises in a different jurisdiction, we'll hold you really accountable for what you didn't make. Because I cast my vote.
The only action you can take,
on the promises
even if it's in the US or in the UK, the only action you can take is to vote them out in the next election. But you cannot say, you made a pledge during my campaign, your campaign said do ABCD and you didn't do it, and therefore we're going to court or we're going to do this. But what happens even in the West is they get punished for not having lived up to their pledge as a party and as a team that came to power, or as the prime minister.
But being voted out.
Yeah, and that's why we have those elections.
I take scruples with the fact that the Constitution has it that this has to be progressively realized, because this is where even politicians will be hanging on for the longest time, donkey years, that we're still not realizing this is like a mirage. Do we even have a sunset clause on it that we know at least this realization will be realized? Like Director General of Vision 2030 here. Vision 2030 here, since we're being told in 2000, it seems far away in 2030. But now, we're only, how many?
No, we're just 7 years shy of 2030. No.
Do we have a sunset clause?
The Constitution did not leave this thing open-ended. This is why Justice Magara, Supreme Court, ordered that Parliament be dissolved if they do not achieve that. So the law is very clear. It's not open-ended. You must achieve this within a certain time frame. If you don't, Parliament stands dissolved. And this, the Chief Justice, Supreme Court, pronounced himself on that. But the President was not willing to play his part. And so Parliament continued. But the law is very clear. I mean, if you don't have that balance, you are not legally constituted as far as the Constitution is concerned. And I think, but you see, the question is, that's not the only thing in the Constitution of Kenya that is being ignored. There are many things in the Constitution that are being ignored. So that's what happened. So I don't think anything would happen. But at least I think the consolation is that they're not being left out entirely. It used to be more than 10 years ago before this new constitution. Now, at least women are being included.
I think it's so dangerous on a bigger picture, because it means that you have the constitution in place, you have the political party of the day coming in, you have things being rolled out that may be in contravention, and then the next regime that comes in will be able to then use the constitution to maybe even reverse good things from a previous regime because of doing that. And that also happens in other countries in the world. When we were talking earlier about this change from one regime to another that keeps happening. And so if you start doing things in contravention to a constitution and legislation, then what happens is you've just given them the entry point to reverse things. And it's happening across the world now because of that. So maybe it's time to do a bit of reflection amongst our political spaces, because I'm going to say this on behalf of the 55% of Kenyan women, of which I am one. This needs to be realized. And if people are listening who are in leadership, please do this as soon as possible.
We can flip
like yesterday.
I think that once the constitution, the way it was crafted, created an intent, the problem was that the intent was created without putting in the process. Now, if you have a parliament that is elected in a free and fair manner, it will not make that happen. It will take a long time before that then goes on. So should we have changed that parliament will consist of 330, of which 110 will be elected this way, and the other 220 will be elected in a different way, right? What is the mechanism that will ensure it happens, right? I don't know politically how it can happen, but I think that the fact that there wasn't a mechanism put in place to ensure that it happens, apart from eventually getting there, is an issue. And the issue of shutting down parliament is to force them to create the mechanism. Yeah? But how?
The challenge is, where the challenge is even the drafting of the constitution, this was a challenge. Because this is about representation. It's about an election. So people go for election, men and women. And for some reason, more men get elected. Even if the equivalent number of women who are contesting. So the thing is, then the constitution went ahead and said, okay, let us reserve specific seats in every county for women, which they did, 47 county women, just to address as a start. But subsequently, then, women must be elected on the other, constituency seats. But if they don't, then the constitution said, okay, then you must provide. And that's where now the issue is. If you provide, then it can only be through nomination. Exactly. And the issue of nomination was, so then how many women would you add through nomination? And so that's why the issue was, do we nominate an extra 100 women? And what would the effect of that be in terms of the budget, in terms of the, so this is where the argument is that it's a very difficult thing to do without looking at all the considerations. Of course, it's happening in the county assemblies. County assemblies, the constitution provided for, and so the difference to address that gender balance is to put in women nominated. So they just calculate for every 3 positions you put 1 woman. Yeah. And so they have always a certain. I have an unpopular suggestion. But for the parliament, that the issue is adding an extra 100, or how do you address? So I think so. These are the challenges. It's not a very easy thing. They have come up with, remember, in parliament with so many different, and each of the alternatives and bills that members came up with did not fly with. It might fly with you, but not with others. So that's the challenge. But I think it's important to appreciate that progressively, even this year, you have seen the increase in the number of women in governor's election, in National Assembly elections, in the Senate elections. All of them, they're increasing. And I think so. The thing is on the Kenyan population, really, looking at that. So if the voters feel that women can provide better leadership than men, then ultimately they will. I see that balance.
But as an economist, I would say it's increasing, but at a decreasing rate. It seems to be faster.
So reducing balance. Oh my God.
You cast your ballot. Do you cast for a woman at your constituency or a man?
But
Perhaps
no, but this is a bad direction to
It is
go
a
in.
bad
So I have an unpopular solution.
which is it?
If you voted in a man this time, next time around the constituency is only given female candidates to choose from. Why not? I told you it would be unpopular.
Yeah.
But on a serious basis.
But
like,
you're the one who
let's
say
flip-
the
let's
the
flip it.
women, they are not willing themselves to give out for
No,
this particular
no.
position. So what
No, I
what will
didn't
really
say-
stimulate them and prompt them to take it?
Don't spin the narrative. That's the word. Look,
He's spinning so much for you.
Yeah, he's spinning against the 55% of Kenyan women. You know, I can tell the women to stop watching your show at this point in time. No, but look, you have a 100+ years of spaces where women have never existed. Now we are creating the spaces where women can now be present. But it doesn't mean that all women are going to automatically see it as a space unless you now have those conversations with women. Now the next generation are much more open. But people in my generation, I joined university when there wasn't affirmative action. It was 20 girls in my class and 100 boys. That was us trying to get in on an equal playing field. That was the
And
reality.
it has a narrative behind it.
Yes,
Okay,
and so
from
we
the
have to.
household.
Yes, and then we have to work with it. But you know, we can, if we add more people from a fiscal perspective, we're going to increase the bill. We cannot afford to increase the bill. We have 9 more PSs. We were just talking about it during the break.
Indeed.
How much is that going to cost, right? Those are the mathematics around it. But if we are serious about affirmative action and we are serious about taking it forward, then we have to make sure it happens. So what does make sure mean? Now, we've tried these different things. It's now 10 years later. We should have rolled out legislation attached to the Constitution, specifically allowing us to roll it out, because that's what normally happens. The Constitution has the broad principles, legislation embeds it. We have not done that. So that's why I said, unpopular suggestion. It means he'll be out of
We are not
parliament
serious
for
about
5 years,
Yeah.
or he goes to a different constituency and tries to get in on that side. Okay,
Deval, you know,
but we are not increasing the
frankly,
bill.
You can't force representation on people. It has not happened in the West, which has been agitating for gender for centuries. You go to UK, you go to US, you go to any of those countries, the number of women's representation in parliament isn't any different significantly than what it is in Kenya. So I think what is important about affirmative action, clearly the Constitution did provide affirmative. That's why the 47 women seats were specifically created in every constituency. That's why 16 women slots were provided in the Senate, specifically as affirmative action. But in regards to the others now, it's the opportunity has been given to the women to contest and Kenyans to vote for women. But I think it's not going to be very easy to legislate and insist one way or the other that you must have half of your representations in parliament to be women. By law, it's not going to be a very easy thing. But apart from not being easy, I don't think it's also necessarily it goes with the concept of democracy and about elections and and all representation and all that. But more importantly, madam, look at it in another way. We have had women in representation and in power now in the last 2 decades significantly. But if you look at they are, if you look at the way those women have ended up being elites. They are not doing much for the women of the country, I'm telling you. They are in parliament, but if you go and do a research on what those women in parliament are doing in terms of helping the cause of women in this country, the only time you see them, for example, in the street is when another of their colleagues is affected, not when an ordinary woman is bashed somewhere or women are starving. You don't see them. And they're not really, we have not seen any significant change in terms of women addressing, those women in power, addressing the concerns of their women in the basic necessities of life in this country. And still women, more than 50% of our women in this country still have problems of getting clean water. They still have problems in medical. They still have problems in food. But that's not the main concern. The concern has been on other things. So really, the impact has not also been felt. This is why, in terms of the election, then you find Kenyans are not electing the women more than the men. If there was an impact, I'm telling you, you would see in the election men being thrashed at the polls.
Indeed.
This is why I talk about the structural discrimination in the system. So I did a piece of research on political party campaign financing. an inadvertent conclusion I came to, which was not in my research because it wasn't part of what I was looking at, was I discovered that political parties in this country give more money to their male candidates than to their female candidates. They give better spots on TV to their male candidates rather than their female candidates. If you drove through this country during elections, you know, the main turnoffs of the superhighways going out into the villages, the big poster was a male candidate. So, I mean, this is what I call structural discrimination. It's things that we do automatically. But then look at his measure of success. His measure of success is that if you're a woman, you should be campaigning for female-related issues. We should see change in issues around women. But that isn't what happens.
That's the thing I don't agree with.
It's a false narrative.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, a woman could be focusing on children. I love education issues. I mean, I shouldn't be forced, because I'm a woman, to constantly improve women's lives. But I don't see men improving women's lives either. So maybe we need men to be campaigning for women. You know, I mean, these are now the nuances of it, but it's part of the preconceptions we have as to what those roles are fulfilling.